He was just a single dad trying to fix a leak in the old town library, a man with calloused hands and a heart held together by love for his daughter. What he didn't know was that the woman he rescued from a torrential downpour wasn't just a stranger with a broken-down car. She was a reclusive billionaire who had vanished from the world, and his simple act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain came down in relentless, slanted sheets, drumming a somber, metallic rhythm against the copper roof of the Oak Creek Public Library. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and damp wool. Leo Vance stood on the top rung of a rickety wooden ladder, his head and shoulders disappearing into the dark, cavernous space of the attic. A single work lamp cast a halo of yellow light around him, illuminating the constellations of dust motes dancing in the air and the intricate spiderwebs that clung to the ancient rafters. His knuckles were raw, scraped from wrestling with a stubborn section of warped roof flashing, and a smear of tar streaked across his cheek, a mark of his battle against the storm. He could feel the cold seeping through the knees of his worn work pants, a dampness that promised an ache later, but he ignored it. This leak, like so many other things in his life, was a problem that couldn't wait. It threatened the history section, where books with cracked spines and faded gold lettering held the town's memory. Mrs. Gable, the librarian with hair the color of spun silver, had called him in a quiet panic, her voice trembling over the phone. "The history is weeping," she'd said, and Leo, who had spent his childhood in this very library, felt the urgency in his bones. He worked with a focused, methodical grace, his hands moving with the quiet confidence of a man who understood how things were put together and how they fell apart. He wasn't just a handyman, he was a restorer, a mender of what was broken, whether it was a sagging porch, a sputtering engine, or the fractured pieces of his own life. Downstairs, his 8-year-old daughter, Mia, sat at a small oak table in the children's section, a fortress of picture books built around her. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth as she filled a blank page with a vibrant, crayon-drawn world. She was the anchor of his universe, the steady, bright light that made the struggle worthwhile. The last few years had been a tightrope walk over a chasm of unpaid bills and unexpected repairs. Since his wife, Clara, had passed, Leo had learned to stretch every dollar until it was transparent, to measure life in gallons of gas and boxes of pasta. Pride was a luxury he couldn't always afford, but integrity was not. He did good work, he was honest, and he was teaching his daughter that the value of a person was measured by the kindness in their hands, not the money in their wallet. A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the attic window, and Leo paused, listening. The storm was getting worse. He needed to finish this, to get Mia home before the roads became impassable. He maneuvered the last piece of sealant into place, pressing it down firmly, his breath fogging in the chilly air. He felt a small, quiet satisfaction in the act, the simple victory of making something whole again. It was a feeling he clung to, a reminder that even in a world that felt like it was constantly breaking, some things could still be fixed. He gathered his tools, the familiar weight of them a comfort in his hands, and began his careful descent back into the warm, book-scented world below, completely unaware that the storm outside was about to wash a stranger into his life who would test every wall he had so carefully built around his heart. As Leo descended the ladder, the rich scent of old wood and rain-soaked earth enveloped him, a perfume unique to the library on a stormy day. He gave a final, reassuring nod to Mrs. Gable, who was hovering anxiously near the circulation desk, her hands clasped together like she was in prayer. "Should hold now," he said, his voice a low, gravelly reassurance. "I'll come back when it's dry to check the seals and replace that damaged plaster." She let out a breath of pure relief, her shoulders slumping. "Oh, Leo, you are a godsend. I don't know what this town would do without you." He just gave a small, tired smile, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. It wasn't about being a godsend, it was about showing up. It was a principle he lived by. He collected Mia from her crayon and paper kingdom, her face lighting up as she held up her finished masterpiece, a drawing of a smiling lion with a magnificent, multicolored mane, reading a book under a rainbow. "It's for you," she said, her voice full of pride. He took it with a reverence typically reserved for priceless artifacts, his heart giving a familiar, painful squeeze. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's talent for finding color in a gray world. "It's the best one yet, Peanut," he said, folding it carefully and tucking it into the chest pocket of his flannel shirt right over his heart. They stepped outside into a world washed in shades of gray. The wind whipped at them, carrying a stinging spray of rain that soaked through Leo's thin jacket in an instant. He pulled Mia closer, shielding her small frame with his own as they hurried toward his aging pickup truck, parked at the far end of the lot. The truck, a '98 Ford, with more rust than paint, was a testament to his life-dented, reliable, and paid for. That's when he saw her. Huddled beneath the meager shelter of a slender oak tree was a woman, her form a stark, elegant silhouette against the swirling mist. She was trying to shield herself with a flimsy, soaked newspaper that had begun to disintegrate in her hands. Her clothes, a tailored blazer and silk blouse, were plastered to her skin, and her expensive-looking heels were sinking into the muddy grass. Beside her, a sleek, black sedanthy, kind of car that looked like it belonged in a different universe. Not the gravel lot of a small-town library sat, with its hazard lights blinking in a slow, defeated rhythm. Leo hesitated for only a second. Mia looked up at him, her eyes wide with concern. "She's getting all wet, Daddy." He didn't need the prompting. Leaving Mia safely under the awning of the library entrance, he jogged over, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice steady over the drumming of the storm. The woman looked up, startled. Her face was pale, her dark hair stuck to her cheeks, but even drenched and shivering, there was an undeniable poise about her, a quiet strength in her stormy gray eyes. She nodded, her teeth chattering slightly. "It won't start. I think the battery died." She looked utterly out of place, a porcelain doll dropped in a mud puddle. Leo glanced at the car, then back at her. "You can't stay out here. My truck's right over there. It's not fancy, but it's warm. Let me give you a ride, and we can call a tow truck from my shop." The woman, who introduced herself only as Sarah, hesitated, a flicker of mistrust in her eyes. It was a look. Leo recognized the look of someone from a world where kindness always came with a price tag. He didn't push. He simply unzipped his jacket, the worn flannel already heavy with rain, and held it out to her. "Here," he said. "At least take this before you freeze." She stared at the jacket, then at his face, and something in her expression softened, the guarded walls cracking just enough to let a sliver of surprise through. Slowly, she took it, her cold fingers brushing his. It was a simple gesture, an old coat offered in a storm, but in the quiet space between them, it felt like something more. It felt like the beginning of a story neither of them was prepared to read. Seraphinar Sarah, as she had called herself, slipped the worn flannel jacket over her shoulders. It was heavy with the scent of rain, sawdust, and something uniquely him, a grounding, honest smell that was a world away from the sterile, perfumed environments she was used to. The warmth of it, even damp, was immediate and startling. She watched as Leo, now fully exposed to the elements, moved toward her car with an unhurried confidence. He didn't ask for her keys. He simply ran a hand along the hood, his brow furrowed in concentration as if he could diagnose the machine's ailment through touch alone. She expected him to sigh, to shake his head, to tell her it was a lost cause and that she'd need an expensive tow and a more expensive mechanic. That was how her world worked. Problems were opportunities for others to profit. Instead, he just said, "Pop the hood for me." She did, using the remote on her key fob, and the quiet, hydraulic hiss of the hood lifting sounded alien in the middle of the storm. He leaned in, his hands moving with an easy familiarity over the complex, pristine engine. She stood back, clutching the jacket around her, feeling utterly useless. This man, with his steady hands and calm demeanor, was solving her problem without a contract, without an invoice, without even a flicker of annoyance. He was just helping. Mia, who had been watching from the library doorway, finally braved the rain and ran over, her small hand slipping into Serafina's. "My daddy can fix anything," she said, her voice a proud, happy whisper. Serafina looked down at the little girl, at her bright, trusting eyes, and felt a pang in her chest so sharp it almost took her breath away. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years, a genuine, uncomplicated human connection. Leo emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag that seemed to appear from nowhere. "It's not your battery," he said, "just a loose connection on the alternator cable. Common on these models when it's damp." He closed the hood with a solid, satisfying thud. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, the cold leather a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of his jacket. She turned the key, and the engine purred to life instantly, its low, powerful hum a sound of pure relief. She looked up at him through the rain-streaked windshield. He was soaked, his t-shirt clinging to his chest, but he was smiling, a small, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She reached for her purse, her hand automatically going for the wallet inside. It was instinct, the transactional nature of her life asserting itself. But before she could even pull it out, he shook his head, a gesture so subtle she almost missed it. "No need," he said. "Just glad you're not stranded. Drive safe." He turned and walked back to his daughter, scooping her up into his arms. As they disappeared into the old, rusted pickup truck, Mia twisted around and waved, a small, vibrant splash of joy in the gray afternoon. Serafina sat there for a long moment, the engine humming, his jacket still around her shoulders, and watched them drive away. She hadn't just been rescued from the rain. She felt as though she'd been rescued from something much deeper, much colder, and she didn't even know his last name. The drive back to her rented cabin was a blur of slick roads and towering pines, their branches heavy with rain. Serafina clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles white, but her mind wasn't on the treacherous curves of the mountain road. It was back in the library parking lot, replaying the encounter with the quiet handyman and his daughter. His name was Leo, Mia. Simple, solid names that felt as real as the worn fabric of the jacket still draped over the passenger seat. The scent of it, that mix of sawdust and something clean and masculine, filled the sterile interior of her luxury car, a tangible reminder of a world she had almost forgotten existed. A world where people helped without expecting anything in return. She had been in Oak Creek for 3 weeks, hiding out in a glass and cedar cabin that cost more per night than Leo probably made in a month. She had told her assistant she needed a digital detox, a break from the relentless pressure of her life as the founder and CEO of Ether, a social connectivity app that had ironically left her feeling more disconnected than ever. But it was more than that. She was running from a backstabbing business partner who had used her trust as a ladder, from a media narrative that had painted her as a cold, calculating tech queen, and from the suffocating loneliness of a life lived in boardrooms and first-class lounges. She had come to Oak Creek, seeking anonymity, a place so small and unremarkable it was practically off the grid. She had wanted to feel invisible, and for a while she had. But then came the storm, the dead car, and Leo. He hadn't seen a billionaire. He hadn't seen the innovator of the year from the cover of Forbes. He had seen a woman in trouble, and he had offered her his coat. It was such a small thing, yet it felt monumental. It was a gesture of pure, uncomplicated humanity, and it had shaken her to her core. When she reached the cabin, she didn't bother with the lights. She simply sank onto the plush sofa, the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a panorama of the stormy valley below. She pulled his jacket from the passenger seat and wrapped it around herself, the rough fabric, a strange comfort against her skin. Tucked into the chest pocket was a folded piece of paper. She pulled it out carefully. It was Mia's drawing of the lion reading a book under a rainbow. On the back, in a child's wobbly print, were the words, "For Daddy, my hero." Serafina stared at the drawing for a long time, tracing the crayon lines with her fingertip. A hero. The word felt foreign, ancient. In her world, there were no heroes, only competitors, assets, and liabilities. A single tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. For the first time in a very long time, she let herself feel something other than the crushing weight of her own success. She felt gratitude. And she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she had to see him again. Leo woke the next morning to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of Mia's cheerful, off-key humming. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under a pale, watery sun. The memory of the woman from the library, Sarah, lingered in his thoughts like the scent of rain. He'd replayed their brief interaction a dozen times, the way she'd looked so lost and vulnerable, the surprise in her eyes when he'd refused her money. He'd told himself it was just a fleeting moment, a simple act of neighborly kindness that meant nothing. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left his jacket hand, a small piece of his carefully guarded peace, with a complete stranger. He spent the day at his workshop, a converted barn behind his small rented house, the air thick with the smell of cedar shavings and varnish. He was restoring a set of antique chairs for the town's historical society, a job that paid little but brought him a deep, quiet satisfaction. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with a practiced artistry, coaxing life back into the tired wood. But his mind kept drifting. He found himself wondering if she was okay, if she'd made it to wherever she was going. He wondered what her story was, what had brought a woman who drove a car worth more than his house to a place like Oak Creek. Around noon, just as he was sanding the final chair leg, he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. He looked up, his heart giving a strange, unfamiliar lurch. It was the same black sedan. She stepped out, this time dressed in simple jeans and a soft cashmere sweater the color of cream. She looked less like a displaced socialite and more like someone trying to remember how to be normal. In her hands, she held his jacket, neatly folded, and a small, brightly colored gift bag. "I hope this is okay," she said, her voice a little hesitant. "I wasn't sure if you had a shop or just worked out of your truck." Leo wiped his hands on his jeans, feeling suddenly self-conscious of the sawdust in his hair and the state of his workshop. "This is it," he said, gesturing around the organized chaos. "It's not much, but it's mine." She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the stacks of lumber, the neatly arranged tools on the pegboard wall, the faint scent of wood smoke from the small stove in the corner. She didn't look down on it. She looked at it with a kind of quiet awe, as if she were seeing something rare and precious. "It's beautiful," she said, and he had the strangest feeling she meant it. She held out the jacket. "Thank you again for this," and she held up the gift bag. "This is for Mia." A thank you for the masterpiece. Leo took the jacket, their fingers brushing for a second time. The brief contact sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the sun streaming through the dusty window panes. He was in trouble. He knew it with the same certainty he knew the grain of oak from the grain of pine. This woman, with her quiet eyes and hidden stories, was a storm of a different kind, and she was threatening to breach the walls he'd spent years building. The gift bag was small but felt surprisingly heavy in Leo's hands. He glanced inside, his brow furrowing in confusion at the sight of professional-grade artist supplies. There was a set of imported watercolor pencils, a thick pad of textured paper, and a collection of fine-tipped ink pens, the kind of materials he'd only ever seen behind glass at a specialty art store. It was a thoughtful gift, almost too thoughtful. It was the kind of gift someone gives when they've paid attention, and that level of observation from a stranger made Leo uneasy. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "It's too much." Serafina shook her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. "It's not. I saw her drawings in the library. She has a gift. A gift like that deserves good tools." Her sincerity was disarming. She wasn't trying to impress him with money. She was trying to connect through a shared appreciation for his daughter's talent. It was a subtle but important distinction, and it chipped away at his defenses more effectively than any grand gesture could have. "Mia's at school," he said, setting the bag carefully on his workbench. "But she'll be thrilled." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the sound of a bird chirping outside the open barn door. Leo felt the need to fill it, to say something, to do something other than stand there feeling the magnetic pull of her presence. "I was just about to break for lunch," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "It's nothing special, just a sandwich, but you're welcome to join me." He immediately regretted it. His sandwiches were 2 slices of bread, a smear of mustard, and whatever lunch meat was on sale that week. It was sustenance, not an invitation. But Serafina's face lit up with a genuine, unpolished delight that took him by surprise. "I'd love that," she said. "I'm so tired of hotel room service and prepackaged salads." He led her out of the workshop and across the small, weedy yard to his house. The paint was peeling on the porch railing, and a collection of Mia's muddy boots stood sentinel by the door. He felt a flash of shame, seeing his world through her eye, a world of make-do and getting by. But when she stepped inside, she didn't seem to notice the worn spots on the hardwood floor or the mismatched chairs at the kitchen table. Her gaze fell on the wall next to the fridge, which was covered from floor to ceiling in Mia's artwork. There were crayon drawings, finger paintings, and construction paper collages, a chaotic, vibrant tapestry of a child's imagination. Serafina stopped, her hand rising to her mouth. She moved closer, tracing one of the drawings with her finger, a portrait of Leo, with a crooked smile and a hammer in his hand. "This is," she started, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "This is the most beautiful gallery I've ever seen." Leo stood in the doorway, his heart a tangled knot of pride and vulnerability. She wasn't looking at what was missing in his life. She was seeing the love that filled it. And in that moment, as she stood admiring a wall of his daughter's art, he forgot that she was a stranger. She felt like someone who understood the language of his heart, a language he thought no one else still spoke. Serafina found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, perched on a slightly wobbly chair at Leo's sun-drenched kitchen table. The sandwich he made her was simple, just as he'd promised, turkey on wheat bread with a slice of crisp lettuce, but it tasted more real than any of the Michelin-starred meals she'd consumed over the past decade. It tasted like home, a concept that had become increasingly abstract to her. She watched him move around the kitchen, the easy, unhurried way he navigated the small space, the gentle care with which he poured Mia a glass of milk for when she got home from school. He didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. He let it be, comfortable in a way she had never been. She, on the other hand, felt a compulsive need to explain herself, to justify her presence in his simple, uncluttered life. "I'm a writer," she said, the lie slipping out more easily than she'd expected. It wasn't a complete fabrication. She had a journal filled with half-finished thoughts and observations, a private world of words she never shared. "I came to Oak Creek for inspiration, to get away from the noise of the city." Leo nodded, taking a bite of his sandwich. He didn't ask what she wrote or if she was published. He just accepted her story, giving her the space to be whoever she wanted to be. That simple act of trust was both a relief and a burden. It made her feel safe, but it also made the lie feel heavier. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question back to him. "Have you always lived here?" He shook his head, his gaze drifting to a framed photo on the windowsill, a picture of a smiling woman with eyes the same bright color as Mia's. "No, Clara, me wife, she grew up here. We moved back from the city when Mia was a baby. She wanted our daughter to have roots, to know what it felt like to belong to a place." His voice was quiet, matter-of-fact, but Serafina could hear the universe of love and loss contained within his words. She didn't offer empty condolences. She knew from her own life that some griefs were too sacred for strangers to touch. Instead, she just said, "She would be proud of you, of this." She gestured around the kitchen, at the art-covered walls, at the quiet peace that filled the air. Leo looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the carefully constructed walls around his heart seemed to vanish. He saw not just a beautiful woman, but a person with a quiet sadness in her eyes, a loneliness that resonated with his own. The school bus rumbled to a stop at the end of the gravel lane just as they were finishing their lunch. Mia came bounding up the path, her backpack bouncing, her face a storm of excitement. She skidded to a halt in the doorway when she saw Serafina, her eyes widening in surprise and then delight. "You came back!" she exclaimed. Serafina smiled, her heart giving a happy lurch. "I did. I brought you something." Leo watched as Mia's face lit up at the sight of the art supplies. She hugged the bag to her chest like it was a treasure, her joy so pure and unvarnished it was almost painful to watch. He saw the way Serafina watched her too, a look of profound, wistful longing on her face. It was the look of someone who had everything and nothing all at once. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in strokes of orange and gold, when Serafina finally said she should go. Leo walked her to her car, the silence between them no longer awkward but filled with the comfortable weight of a shared afternoon. As she slid into the driver's seat, she turned to him, her gray eyes serious. "Thank you, Leo. For lunch, for everything." He just nodded, his hands in his pockets. Any time. He didn't ask for her number. She didn't offer it. But as she drove away, leaving him standing in a cloud of dust and fading sunlight, they both knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something complicated, something unexpected, and something that had the potential to either heal them or break them completely. The days that followed settled into a strange, unspoken rhythm. Serafina found reasons to be near Leo's world, always under the guise of research for her supposed writing. She'd appear at the local diner, where he and Mia sometimes had breakfast, her laptop open on the table, a cup of untouched tea beside it. She would just happen to be at the hardware store, staring quizzically at a box of nails, when he came in for supplies. Each encounter was couched in plausible deniability, a careful dance of "fancy seeing you here." Leo, for his part, played along, though he was no fool. He saw the pattern, the quiet intention behind her coincidences. A part of him, the cautious, wounded part that had been in charge for so long, warned him to keep his distance. This woman was a mystery, a beautiful enigma with secrets she kept locked behind her polite smiles. But another part of him, a part he thought had long gone dormant, was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He was captivated by the contradictions of earthy, expensive watch on her wrist, paired with the genuine, uninhibited way she laughed at Mia's silly jokes, the elegant, poised way she carried herself, and the vulnerability that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. One Saturday, she found them at the town's farmer's market. Leo was patiently explaining the difference between an heirloom tomato and a regular one to Mia, who was more interested in the stand selling homemade donuts. Serafina approached, a woven basket slung over her arm, looking for all the world like she belonged there. "Writer's block," she said with a wry smile. "Thought some fresh air might help." They ended up spending the entire morning together, wandering from stall to stall. She bought a bouquet of wildflowers, a jar of local honey, and a bag of the donuts Mia had been coveting. They sat on a hay bale near the edge of the market, the sun warm on their faces, and talked. She asked him about his work, about the different kinds of wood he used, about the stories behind the antique pieces he restored. He, in turn, found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone since Clara. He told her about his dream of one day buying the workshop and the land it sat on, of building a real home for Mia, a place with roots so deep no storm could shake them. He didn't tell her it was a dream that felt increasingly out of reach, a distant star in a sky full of clouds. He didn't want her pity, he just wanted her to see him, and she did. As he spoke, she listened with an intensity that made him feel like the most interesting man in the world. She wasn't just hearing his words, she was absorbing them, understanding the unspoken hopes and fears that lay beneath them. Mia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, leaned against Serafina's side, a dusting of powdered sugar on her nose. "You smell nice," she said matter-of-factly, "like flowers, and Safety. Serafina froze, her smile faltering. She looked at Leo over Mia's head, her eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion. Safety was the one thing she had never been able to buy, the one thing she had never truly felt. And here, on a hay bale in a small town, a little girl had just handed it to her like a gift. The moment was fragile, a perfect, crystalline thing that Leo was afraid to breathe on for fear of shattering it. This was getting dangerous. The comfortable distance he had tried to maintain was eroding, replaced by a current of feeling so strong it threatened to pull him under. He was starting to care about her, really care, and he didn't even know who she really was. The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day that had started with the promise of normalcy. Leo was in his workshop, putting the final coat of polish on the restored library chairs, the familiar scent of beeswax filling the air. His phone buzzed on the workbench, the screen displaying an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but a nagging feeling made him answer. "Is this Leo Vance?" a slick professional voice asked. Leo confirmed, his guard immediately up. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm with Insight magazine. We're doing a feature piece, and your name has come up in our research." Leo frowned. "I think you have the wrong person." "I'm a handyman, not a celebrity." Julian chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, we know who you are. We're more interested in who you've been spending your time with. Serafina Sterling, to be exact. Or does she go by Sarah with you?" The name hit Leo like a physical blow. Serafina Sterling. He'd seen that name before, on the cover of a business magazine, at the grocery store checkout. The tech titan who built an empire from nothing. The most powerful woman. Under 40, he felt the blood drain from his face. The writer. The woman with sad eyes who was looking for inspiration. It was all a lie. "We have photos, Mr. Vance," Julian continued, his voice taking on a predatory edge. "You, her, the little girl, at a farmer's market. It's a very heartwarming story. The reclusive billionaire finding solace in the arms of a simple, small-town carpenter. Our readers will love it. I'm just calling to see if you have a comment." Leo's hand tightened around the phone, his knuckles turning white. He felt a cold, sickening rage build in his chest. He had been a fool. He had let her in, let her near his daughter, and she had been playing a part the whole time. He was her research, her quaint, rustic escape from a world of unimaginable wealth and power. "I have no comment," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He hung up before Julian could say another word. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the workshop pressing in on him. The smell of beeswax now seemed cloying, suffocating. He looked at the chairs, at the beautiful, honest work of his hands, and felt a profound sense of shame. He had allowed himself to be deceived, to be made a part of a story that was never his. He walked over to the small, dusty window and stared out at the quiet, familiar landscape of his life. It felt fragile now, exposed. The storm he had feared wasn't a mystery. It was her. And she had brought her world of headlines and hidden agendas crashing down on his. He didn't know if he was more angry or heartbroken. All he knew was that the fragile trust he had started to build had been shattered into a million pieces. The magazine hit the newsstands 2 days later. Leo saw it while he was picking up milk and bread, its glossy cover a stark, brutal confirmation of his fears. The headline was splashed across the front in bold, dramatic font. "Billionaire in hiding. Tech mogul Serafina Sterling's secret small town romance." And there it was, the photo. A candid shot from the farmer's market, taken from a distance with a long lens. He was looking at her, a soft, unguarded smile on his face. She was looking at Mia, her expression one of gentle affection. Mia was leaning against her, happy and trusting. It was a picture of stolen intimacy, a private moment twisted into a public spectacle. The article was even worse. It painted him as a rugged carpenter, a salt-of-the-earth single father, who had captured the heart of the world's most elusive billionaire. It was a narrative, a fairy tale, and he was a character in it, his life and his struggles reduced to a romantic trope. He felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up his neck. He bought the magazine, his hands shaking as he paid the cashier, who gave him a look of knowing pity. When he got back to his truck, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, the magazine open on the passenger seat, the smell of its glossy pages filling the cab. He felt like a fool. He had been so careful, so guarded for so long, and yet he had let this woman, with her sad eyes and easy lies, walk right into the center of his world. He had let her get close to Mia. That was the part that cut the deepest. He had exposed his daughter to this, to her world of secrets and photographers hiding in the bushes. He drove home in a daze, the world outside his windshield seeming distant and unreal. He found her waiting for him on his porch. She was standing there, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of a stylish trench coat, her face pale and strained. She had clearly seen the magazine, too. "Leo, I can explain," she started, her voice trembling. He walked past her without a word, unlocked his front door, and stepped inside. He didn't slam it. That would have been too easy, too honest. He simply closed it. The quiet click of the latch, a sound of finality. He heard her call his name from the other side, a desperate, pleading sound, but he didn't answer. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door, his eyes squeezed shut, and listened as her footsteps finally, reluctantly, faded away. The world had found her, and in doing so, it had shattered his. The aftermath was a quiet, suffocating chaos. The article, and the photos that accompanied it, went viral. Suddenly, Leo's gravel driveway became a destination. Cars he didn't recognize would slow down as they passed his house, their occupants craning their necks for a glimpse of the billionaire's carpenter. A local news van parked at the end of his lane for 2 days, its satellite dish a stark, metallic intrusion against the backdrop of pine trees. His phone, which usually only rang with calls from clients or the school, now buzzed incessantly with requests for interviews from reporters with syrupy, insincere voices. He stopped answering. His quiet, predictable life had been invaded, its peaceful rhythms disrupted by the relentless hum of public curiosity. The hardest part was the change in his own town. The people of Oak Creek, who had known him for years as just Leo, now looked at him differently. There were whispers at the post office, sideways glances at the diner. They weren't malicious, not really. It was a mixture of awe, envy, and a kind of protective concern. They were trying to understand how their world, the world of bake sales and high school football games, had collided with the world of billionaires and magazine covers. But their curiosity felt like a judgment, another layer of exposure he hadn't asked for. His work, the one thing that had always been his sanctuary, was affected too. A few clients canceled, uncomfortable with the sudden notoriety. A wealthy couple from the city, who had commissioned him to build a custom library, suddenly seemed more interested in his story than his craftsmanship. They asked him questions about Serafina, their eyes gleaming with a vicarious thrill, and Leo felt something inside him curdle. His skill, his art, was being overshadowed by a narrative he had never wanted to be a part of. But the true cost was measured in Mia's confusion. "Why are those people taking pictures of our house, Daddy?" she asked one evening, her small face pressed against the living room window. "Are we famous?" Leo knelt beside her, his heart aching. "No, Peanut," he said, his voice thick. "We're not famous. There's just a misunderstanding." He couldn't bring himself to explain the truth, to tarnish her pure, happy memories of the woman who had brought her art supplies and smelled like safety. He couldn't tell her that her Sarah was a lie. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He retreated. He built his walls higher, thicker. He stopped going to the diner. He started taking the back roads. He tried to shrink his world back to its original size, to protect what little was left of their peace. But it was too late. The silence in his workshop was no longer peaceful, it was lonely. And every time he looked at Mia's bright, innocent face, he was haunted by the ghost of a woman who had shown him a glimpse of a different kind of life, only to reveal that it was built on a foundation of secrets. Serafina sat in the sterile silence of a five-star hotel suite overlooking a city she no longer recognized as home. The view from the panoramic window was breathtaking, a glittering tapestry of light stretching to the horizon, but it brought her no comfort. It felt like looking at a postcard from someone else's life. She hadn't spoken to Leo since the day he had closed his door on her. She had tried calling, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She had thought about driving back to Oak Creek, about standing on his porch and refusing to leave until he listened. But she knew it would only make things worse. Her presence was the problem. Her world was the poison. The Insight magazine article was just the beginning. Other outlets had picked up the story, each one adding its own layer of speculation and sensationalism. She was no longer just a reclusive billionaire. She was the protagonist in a modern-day fairy tale, and Leo and Mia were her supporting cast. She read the online comments, a masochistic ritual she couldn't seem to stop. They were a torrent of opinions from strangers who felt they had a right to her life. Some romanticized the story, calling her brave for choosing love over money. Others were more cynical, accusing her of using Leo as a PR stunt or a poverty tourism experience. Both narratives made her feel sick. They had taken something fragile and real and flattened it into a two-dimensional caricature. Her phone buzzed with calls from her board of directors, her PR team, her estranged family. They all wanted a statement, a strategy, a way to control the narrative. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't ask about the man with the kind eyes or the little girl with the crayon drawings. They only saw a brand in crisis, a stock price to be protected. She ignored them all. The only person she wanted to talk to was the one person who wouldn't answer her calls. One rainy afternoon, she found herself staring at a blank sheet of hotel stationery, a pen heavy in her hand. She started to write, the words pouring out in a torrent of guilt and regret. Leo, I never meant for any of this to happen. I know I'm sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough. The truth is, I was a coward. I was so afraid of you seeing me as Serafina Sterling, the headline, the brand, that I hid behind a lie. I wanted just for a little while to be someone who was seen for who they were, not what they had. You and Mia gave me that. You gave me more in a few weeks than my entire life had given me before. You showed me what home could feel like, and I ruined it. I understand why you can't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either. I just needed you to know that it was real. For me, it was the only real thing. She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. But she didn't mail it. It felt like another intrusion, another demand on his peace. So, she tucked it away in her journal, a silent confession in a locked room, another secret in a life already full of them. Weeks bled into a month. The media frenzy slowly died down, replaced by newer, shinier scandals. The news vans disappeared from the end of Leo's lane, and the curious onlookers moved on. But the ghost of what had happened remained. A quiet tension lingered in the air of Oak Creek, an invisible scar on the town's peaceful facade. Leo's business had not recovered. The cloud of notoriety, however faded, still hung over him. He was no longer just the town's trusted handyman, he was a story, a curiosity. People were hesitant to call, to let that story into their homes. He started taking on smaller, less profitable jobs in neighboring towns, driving farther for less pay, just to keep the lights on. The dream of buying his workshop felt more distant than ever. He was tired. A deep, bone-weary fatigue had settled into his soul. He missed the easy rhythm of his old life, the simple satisfaction of his work. But most of all, he missed the laughter. He missed the way Serafina's presence had filled the quiet spaces in his home, the way she had looked at Mia with such open-hearted wonder. He missed the hope she had unknowingly sparked in him, a hope he had been too afraid to name. One evening, as he was tucking Mia into bed, she looked up at him, her eyes serious. "Daddy, are we poor?" The question was a punch to the gut. "No, Peanut," he said, his voice strained. "We have everything we need." "But you look sad all the time now," she said, her voice a small, worried whisper. "And you don't sing in the workshop anymore." He sat on the edge of her bed, his heart breaking. He had tried so hard to shield her from his struggles, but she saw everything. She saw the worry etched on his face, the slump in his shoulders. She saw that the color had drained from their world. He had closed the door on Serafina to protect his daughter, but in doing so, he had inadvertently built a cage of sadness around them both. He had been so focused on the risk of letting her in that he had never considered the cost of keeping her out. Later that night, long after Mia had fallen asleep, Leo sat at his kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He pulled out the folded, crayon-drawn picture of the lion that Mia had given him, the one he had tucked into his pocket on the day he met Serafina. He stared at it for a long time, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the grayness he felt inside. He had been a hero in his daughter's eyes. But what kind of hero lets fear make his decisions? What kind of hero builds walls so high that they keep out the very light that could save them? The realization dawned on him slowly. A painful, dawning light. He hadn't been protecting Mia. He had been protecting his own wounded heart. And it was costing them both too much. The package arrived on a crisp autumn morning. It wasn't delivered by a mail truck, but by a discreet courier in an unmarked van. The box was large, unassuming, and addressed simply to the Oak Creek Public Library. Mrs. Ixeo Gable, intrigued, signed for it, and with the help of the courier, brought it inside. She slit the packing tape with her letter opener, her curiosity piqued. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, was a heavy, leather-bound book and a thick envelope. The book was a first edition of Walden, a collector's item worth a small fortune. Tucked inside the cover was a small, elegant card that read, "For the place where stories are kept safe." Mrs. Gable's eyes widened. She opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check and a letter. The check was made out to the library for an amount that made her sit down abruptly. The letter was typed on plain, high-quality paper with no letterhead. It spoke of the importance of community, of preserving history, and of ensuring that places of quiet refuge continue to exist for future generations. It announced the establishment of the Clara Vance Memorial Fund, an anonymous endowment dedicated to the complete restoration and ongoing maintenance of the Oak Creek Public Library. The letter specified one condition: the restoration project, a massive undertaking that would include a new roof, updated wiring, and the careful preservation of the original woodwork, was to be awarded to a local craftsman of proven skill and integrity. It suggested one name: Leo Vance. There was no signature on the letter, only a single, typed initial at the bottom. S. Mrs. Gable sat stunned for a long moment, the check trembling in her hand. She looked around her beloved library, at the peeling paint, the water-stained ceiling, and the flickering lights. This wasn't just a donation. It was a miracle. It was a lifeline. She picked up the phone, her heart pounding with a mixture of shock and a dawning, joyful understanding. She dialed the number for Leo's workshop, a wide, knowing smile spreading across her face. She couldn't wait to tell him that a storm had brought more than just a leak to their quiet little town. It had brought a guardian angel. When Mrs. Gable called, Leo was staring at a stack of unpaid bills, the numbers swimming before his eyes. Her voice on the other end of the line was a torrent of excited, jumbled words: endowment, restoration, anonymous donor, his name. At first, he didn't understand. It sounded too fantastic, too impossible. He drove to the library in a daze, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of what she was telling him. He stood in the quiet, sun-drenched reading room and read the letter for himself. The Clara Vance Memorial Fund. The words hit him with the force of a tidal wave. Someone had not only seen his struggle, but they had also seen his heart. They had honored his past, his love, his loss, in the most profound and unexpected way. There was no signature, just the initial S. But he didn't need a signature. He knew it was her. This wasn't pity. This wasn't charity. This was a gesture of such deep, intuitive understanding that it bypassed all his defenses and went straight to the core of him. She hadn't tried to fix his life. She hadn't offered him a handout. She had given him back his purpose. She had created an opportunity for him to do what he did best, to build, to restore, to make things whole again, on a scale he had never dreamed of. She had given him back his dignity. He walked out of the library and into the crisp autumn air, the world seeming sharper, more vibrant than it had in months. He looked up at the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue, and felt a profound shift inside him. The anger, the bitterness, the fear that had been his constant companions had receded, replaced by a wave of overwhelming, heart-stopping gratitude. He finally understood. She hadn't brought chaos into his life. She had brought a chance for a new beginning. He had been so afraid of her world, but she had just quietly, selflessly rebuilt his. That evening, he sat down with Mia at the kitchen table. He pulled out a fresh sheet of her best drawing paper and a box of crayons. "I need your help," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I need to send a thank you note, and I think it needs a picture." Mia's eyes lit up. "For Sarah?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Leo nodded, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Yeah, Peanut," he said, "for Sarah." They worked on it together, side by side. Leo wrote the words, a simple, heartfelt message of thanks. Mia drew the picture. It wasn't of a lion this time. It was a drawing of a small, sturdy house with a massive, strong roof. Underneath it, a man, a woman, and a little girl were holding hands. And above them, the sun was shining. Leo didn't know her address, but he had a feeling he knew where to send it. He addressed the envelope to S. Sterling C.O. The Ether Foundation, New York, and dropped it in the mail the next morning. It was a message in a bottle, a leap of faith. He didn't know if she would get it, or if she would respond. But it didn't matter. The act of sending it was enough. It was an acknowledgement, a bridge across the silence. It was his way of saying, "I see you too." The letter arrived at Serafina's penthouse on a gray Monday morning. Her assistant, a prim and efficient woman named Evelyn, placed it on the polished marble of her desk with a discreet cough. "This came for you. There's no return address." Serafina glanced at it, her heart giving a familiar, painful lurch. It was a simple, hand-addressed envelope. The handwriting was a child's. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. She recognized the careful, slightly wobbly print from the drawing of the lion. She opened it with a sense of dread and hope so intertwined she couldn't separate them. Inside was a crayon drawing and a short, handwritten note. She looked at the drawing first. The house with the strong roof, the three figures holding hands, the smiling sun. A lump formed in her throat. Then she read the note, her eyes blurring with tears. "Thank you. You gave me back more than just a job. You gave me back my hope, Leo." She sank into her leather office chair, the note clutched in her hand. He knew. He had understood. He hadn't rejected her gesture. He had accepted it with the same quiet grace with which he did everything. For weeks, she had been trying to re-engage with her old life. She had attended board meetings, taken investor calls, and started sketching out plans for a new philanthropic branch of her company. But it had all felt hollow, like she was going through the motions. Her heart wasn't in it. Her heart was in a small, dusty workshop in a town called Oak Creek. She stared out the window at the sprawling, indifferent city below. She had built an empire here, a monument to her own ambition and intelligence. But it was a cold, lonely kingdom. She thought about Leo's small, cluttered house, the walls covered in his daughter's art. She thought about the smell of his workshop, the warmth of his worn flannel jacket, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. That was real. This penthouse, this board meeting, this life of curated perfection was the illusion. She stood up, a sudden, fierce resolve solidifying inside her. She had been waiting for a sign, for permission, for the world to somehow align itself. But the world didn't give you permission. You had to take it. She buzzed her assistant. "Evelyn, clear my schedule for the rest of the week." "But Miss Sterling, you have the quarterly review. Cancel it," Serafina said, her voice firm, clear, and for the first time in a long time completely her own. "I have to go fix a leak." She didn't pack a bag. She didn't arrange for a car. She just walked out of her office, out of her building, and hailed a cab. Leo's letter clutched in her hand like a compass. She was done running. She was done hiding. She was going home. The drive to Oak Creek was a 5-hour journey that felt like a lifetime. Serafina rented a car at the nearest airport, a nondescript sedan that was the antithesis of the luxury vehicles she was used to. It felt right. She was shedding her old skin, 1 mile at a time. By the time she reached the familiar, tree-lined roads of the small town, her nerves were a tangled knot. What if she was wrong? What if his note was just a polite thank you, a final closing of the chapter? What if he didn't want to see her? She almost turned back a dozen times, her hand hovering over the gear shift, her mind a whirlwind of doubt. But then she would glance at the drawing sitting on the passenger seat, the crayon house with the strong roof, and she would keep driving. She didn't go to his house. That felt like an intrusion. Instead, she drove to the library. It was late afternoon, and the golden hour light was filtering through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the floating dust motes in a way that made the place feel sacred. She saw his truck parked in the lot, and her heart started to pound. She walked inside, the small bell above the door chiming softly. The air smelled of books and sawdust. He was there, on a ladder near the history section, carefully fitting a piece of custom-milled crown, molding into place. He was so absorbed in his work, his movements so precise and focused, that he didn't hear her come in. Mrs. Gable, sitting at the circulation desk, looked up and her eyes widened. She put a finger to her lips, a conspiratorial smile spreading across her face, and simply nodded toward him. Serafina stood there for a long moment, just watching him. He was in his element, a master of his craft, a man who found beauty and purpose in restoring what was broken. He was the most magnificent man she had ever known. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Looks like you could use a hand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Leo froze, his hand still holding the molding in place. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding hers across the dusty, sunlit room. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked like he had been waiting. He didn't say a word. He simply came down the ladder, one slow, deliberate step at a time, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped just a few feet in front of her, a dusting of sawdust in his hair, his face smudged with dirt. He looked real, solid, and impossibly dear. "I got your note," he said, his voice low and steady. "I got yours," she replied, her voice trembling. A silence stretched between them, a silence so full of unspoken words, of regret and hope and a fierce, terrifying love that it was almost deafening. It was Leo who broke it. "I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so scared of you leaving that I pushed you away." "And I was a coward," she whispered, taking a step closer. "I was so scared of you seeing me that I hid." He reached out then, his calloused, work-worn hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was electric, a current of pure, unadulterated truth. "I don't care who you are, Sarah," he said, using the name she had given him, the name that felt more real than her own. "I only care that you're here." "I'm not leaving again," she said, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "Not ever." He wiped away a tear with his thumb, his gaze so full of love, it stole her breath. "Good," he said, "because I don't think I could let you go." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss, like the ones they had shared before. It was a kiss of certainty, of coming home. It was a kiss that tasted of sawdust and second chances, of forgiveness and a love that was strong enough to restore anything. In the quiet, sacred space of the library, surrounded by the stories of the past, they finally began to write their own. The restoration of the Oak Creek Public Library became more than just a job. It became a collaboration, a testament to their new beginning. Leo worked with a renewed sense of purpose, his hands shaping wood and plaster with a joyful energy that had been missing for years. Serafina was there every day, not as a benefactor or a boss, but as a partner. She traded her designer clothes for jeans and work boots, her board meetings for blueprints and sawdust. She learned how to mix plaster, how to sand wood, how to hold a level steady. She was clumsy at first, her movements unsure, but she was a quick study, her sharp mind soaking up the new skills with an eager intensity. They worked side by side, their days filled with the easy rhythm of shared labor, their conversations a comfortable mix of practical details and quiet revelations. He taught her the difference between dovetail and mortise and tenon joints. She taught him how to read a balance sheet and create a 5-year business plan. They were two different worlds, two different languages, but they found a common ground in the shared act of building something beautiful together. The town watched, at first with curiosity, and then with a growing sense of acceptance and admiration. They saw Serafina not as a mysterious billionaire, but as the woman who showed up with coffee for the volunteer painters who helped Mrs. Gable reshelve books, who listened to the old-timers' stories with genuine interest. They saw a woman who was actively, humbly, becoming a part of their community. Mia was a constant, happy presence, her small sketchbook always in hand. She would sit for hours in a sunny corner of the library, documenting the transformation in a series of vibrant, detailed drawings. She drew her father on a ladder, his face streaked with paint. She drew Serafina sanding a windowsill, a determined look on her face. She drew them all together, a team, a family. One afternoon, as they were installing the new custom-built bookshelves, Leo paused and watched Serafina as she carefully measured a piece of trim. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a smudge of paint on her nose, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up and caught him staring, a questioning smile on her lips. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, his voice soft. "It's just, you belong here." A look of profound, radiant happiness washed over her face. "I know," she said. And in that simple exchange, everything that had once been complicated and fraught with fear became simple. They had found their way back to each other, not by ignoring their differences, but by building a bridge between them, a bridge made of trust, respect, and a love that was as solid and enduring as the old-growth oak they were working with. They had stopped trying to fit into each other's worlds. They had simply created a new one. A world where a handyman and a billionaire could stand side by side, covered in sawdust, and be completely, perfectly at home. The grand reopening of the library was a town-wide event. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and the scent of roasting hot dogs and fresh-baked apple pie filled the town square. The library, once a symbol of gentle decay, now stood as a beacon of community pride, its new copper roof gleaming in the sun, its freshly painted trim a crisp, clean white. Inside, the transformation was even more breathtaking. The original hardwood floors had been restored to a warm, glowing sheen. The new bookshelves, all handcrafted by Leo, were filled to bursting. A new children's wing, funded by an additional anonymous donation from S, had a colorful mural on the wall, a perfect, larger-than-life replica of Mia's drawing of the lion reading under a rainbow. Leo and Serafina stood near the entrance, greeting people as they poured in. He was wearing a new, clean flannel shirt, she, a simple, elegant dress. They stood close, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, their hands intertwined. They were a team, a unit, and the entire town seemed to celebrate not just the library, but them. Mia, in a new dress and her hair tied back with a ribbon, acted as the official tour guide for the new children's wing, her voice full of pride as she pointed out all the new features. Later, the mayor stood on the library steps and gave a speech, thanking the anonymous benefactor and the master craftsman who had brought their beloved institution back to life. He called Leo to the podium. Leo, who hated public speaking, felt a moment of panic, but then he looked at Serafina, who gave him a small, encouraging nod, and he found his voice. He didn't talk about the endowment or the complexities of the restoration. He talked about community, about the importance of preserving the places that hold our stories. He talked about his wife, Clara, and her love for this library. And then he looked directly at Serafina, his voice thick with an emotion that everyone in the crowd could feel. "And I want to thank the person who reminded me that the most beautiful things in life aren't the ones that are perfect," he said, "but the ones that are restored with love." The crowd applauded, a warm, heartfelt sound that echoed through the square. After the speeches, as the sun began to set, they found a quiet moment to themselves in the new reading garden. They sat on a bench, the scent of late-blooming roses in the air, and watched as Mia chased fireflies across the lawn. "Happy?" Serafina asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "More than I ever thought I could be," he said, his voice a low, contented rumble. He turned to her, his eyes full of a deep, abiding love. "I've been thinking," he said. "This library is restored. My workshop is thriving. Mia is happy." He paused, taking her hand in his. "It seems like the only thing left that's broken is the fact that you don't have my last name." Serafina's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as he slid a simple, elegant ring onto her finger. It wasn't a diamond. It was a smooth, polished piece of oak, inlaid with a thin band of copper from the old library roof. It was a piece of their story, a symbol of everything they had built together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that sealed their future. A promise made not in a boardroom or a penthouse, but in a small town under a sky full of stars, where a simple act of kindness in a storm had led them both home.